Welcome to According to Sam, folks. This is episode 224. Thank you so much for tuning in. I told you. I told you what was going to happen. It's the same thing that happened at the end of the movie Gladiator when Maximus and Commodus fight. Even though Commodus has taken an advantage and pierced Maximus in the side, and he's bleeding out. Maximus is a centurion. He's a trained fighter. He easily beats Commodus. And I told you. Last night was a battle. It certainly isn't the war, but I told you what was going to happen in that battle, and everybody saw it. It's weird watching the media, and a lot of them seem surprised. It seems like that when they've been gaslighting us over the weeks, telling us that the videos are cheap, fake, and all that stuff, that they believe their own gaslighting. They weren't only gaslighting us, that they were gaslighting themselves, is what it seems like if you listen to some of these guys talk. I want to apologize. In the last podcast, I had hit a button on my keyboard and it removed the HD projection. There was this type of filter over the screen. It was difficult to see in the last podcast, and I feel really bad about that because I was showing a lot of video. That's the whole purpose of doing this podcast on video, so I can show you video. I was showing you a lot of video that kind of tied together the narrative that I was telling in the last podcast, and I hope that filter and that projection didn't ruin the podcast. But we're going to get back into a little bit into that in this podcast, and then also in the next podcast. In the last podcast, if you didn't watch, we were talking about political violence and how political violence started to manifest in this country in the 21st century. We were talking about only the history in the 21st century and how there was a little political violence in the turn of the century, the election of George Bush, but within 9 months of George Bush being president, there was this terrorist attack, and that kind of brought the nation together for a short period of time and kind of extinguished political violence. And then political violence started to rise up again when Trump came on the scene in 2016. And that's the narrative that I was telling in the last podcast. And we're looking at all of the political violence that was going on. Now, I want to make a distinction between two types of political violence. So there's one type of political violence, which you have a lone wolf, a single individual, usually a nut job, someone who is not all there mentally, and they go out motivated by politics and commit political violence. Give you an example. Dylan Roof went into the church, the black church in North Carolina, shot up those black parishioners in that church. He was motivated. They say that he was motivated by racial motivations and I guess some political motivations. Another example, the guy that shot up all the black people at the grocery store in Buffalo, New York. He put out a manifesto. He was motivated by politics. A lone individual who is usually a nut job. Sometimes even these nut jobs are very well known by the FBI, have had contact with the FBI, but it's a lone individual, like the trans woman that shot up the school in Tennessee. Although we don't know her motivations totally, because unlike the white guy that shot up the grocery store in Buffalo, they released his manifesto, but this trans woman who shot up the school in Tennessee, they haven't released her manifesto, but we believe that she was politically motivated. Or there was during the Dobbs decision, when Supreme Court was ruling on the Dobbs decision, there was a gentleman from California who traveled to Virginia with a gun, and he was arrested outside of Brett Kavanaugh's house. And he says that he was going to kill Brett Kavanaugh and other members of the Supreme Court. That was something that he stated. So he was motivated by politics because of the ruling on Dobbs. And this was after, if you guys remember, the ruling was leaked, and then they came out with the actual ruling, I guess 4 weeks later. So in between that time, after the ruling was leaked, and then they came out with the ruling, this individual traveled to the D.C. area to assassinate Brett Kavanaugh. That's political violence, but it's a lone individual. One more example, the guy who went to the baseball field where Congress was practicing for the congressional baseball game, and he had a rifle and he shot Steve Scalise, who's motivated by politics. He's a lone individual. That's political violence. So I'm not talking about that kind of political violence. In what I was talking about in the last podcast, the political violence that took place at Trump's rallies as he campaigned in 2016, that's mob violence. That's not a lone individual, a nut. It's a bunch of nuts, nut jobs that are motivated. Mob violence, like what happened in 2016 at Trump rallies, like what happened in 2020 with Black Lives Matter, leading into January of 2021 and January 6th, mob violence. So that's the type of political violence that I want to focus on, is this mob violence, Antifa, Black Lives Matter. Again, what happened at January 6th. And that's what we're going to talk about in this podcast. I wanted to get into 2020 and talk about Black Lives Matter and lead into January of 2021 and talk about January 6th. But we're going to talk about January 6th in this podcast, and then we'll probably pick up the violence in 2020 that led up to January 6th in the next podcast. Okay, so let's get started with this clip. This is a clip that went viral yesterday before the debate last night, and this was CNN, a anchor on CNN confronting a Republican congressman. Take a listen.
American people over the course of the last 3.5 years. He's not going to defend his record. He's going to try to attack.
Speaking of defending Trump's record, one issue that I'm certain will come up is the question of January 6th. You were there that day. You helped Capitol Police secure the Capitol as it was being attacked by rioters. Yep. You've spoken very openly about how you think that kind of violence should be denounced. Donald Trump has not done that. How would you like to see him handle that subject?
Well, it was a very, very ugly day here. I'm in the Capitol right now. There's nothing in between. It was an ugly day. It certainly should be denounced. It was 4 hours, not to minimize it, because it was our nation's capital. And I will tell you this: I saw people's eyes that were there to do two things: create mayhem, create violence, and create all kinds of anarchy and chaos and violence, and they did. Most of those people, by the way, in my view, because they were carrying oxygen tanks and all kinds of other equipment, I don't believe we're even at the rally. So the idea of trying to pin it on President Trump's words.
So what's he talking about when he says weren't even at the rally? So he's talking about because the ellipse where Trump spoke is a mile away from the Capitol. So he's saying that people that attacked the Capitol before Trump even finished speaking, that had all of this equipment, same thing that Director Ray says. I played this for you before. This is Director Ray. Let's listen to him again.
I guess let me step back and say, first thing is there are sort of three groups of people involved in January 6th. The first group, the largest group, the group we need to spend the least time talking about is peaceful, maybe rowdy protesters, but who weren't violating the law.
So the largest group, this group, the first group that he talks about, that's the same group that Representative Muser is talking about here, that were down at the Ellipse listening to the president speak. When he says at the rally, he's talking about the group that was down at the Ellipse listening to the president speak. Okay, so that's the first group, the largest group, the group that we need to spend the least time talking about because they were peaceful, maybe rowdy, but they didn't break the law.
But who weren't violating the law. Then there's a second group, think of a reverse pyramid, a second group that is people who may have come intending to just be part of peaceful protests, but either swept up in the motive or emotion or whatever, engaged in kind of low-level criminal behavior, trespass, say, on the Capitol grounds, but not breaching the building.
So trespassing on the Capitol grounds is in the second group. These are people that came intending to be peaceful, but got caught up in the emotion, and they trespassed on the Capitol grounds. Now, was there any signage that says don't go on Capitol ground, Director Ray? Was there any fencing put up that showed them that no, you're not supposed to go into this area? But he's calling these people lawbreakers, this second group. And this second group was likely down at the Ellipse as well, listening to the president speak. But then you want to listen about this third group.
Behavior, trespass, say, on the Capitol grounds, but not breaching the building. Still criminal conduct, still needs to be addressed, but more on the fly, in the moment, opportunistic. The third group, the smallest group numerically, but by far and away the most serious group, are those who breached the Capitol grounds, who engaged in violence against law enforcement, who attempted to disrupt the members of Congress in the conduct of their constitutional responsibilities. And of those, some of those people clearly came to Washington, we now know, with plans
prepared.
And intentions.
They came prepared. They came plans. They came with all the stuff that Representative Muser says here, that this was an organized group, but it was a small group. And what Muser is saying here, they weren't even down at the Ellipse listening to the president say, be peaceful and patriotic. They didn't care about that.
On chaos and violence, and they did. Most of those people, by the way, in my view, because they were carrying oxygen tanks and all kinds of other equipment, I don't believe were even at the rally. So the idea of trying to pin it on President Trump's words, I think falls way short. So I do think the president would address it for what it was, for what the American people saw, and denounce it. And
he's talked about pardoning those folks that you were talking about being violent and that hurt a lot.
He never said that he was going to pardon the people that were violent. That's an absolute lie that you're pitching.
Was for what the American people saw, and denounce it. And he's
talked about pardoning those folks that you were talking about being violent and that hurt.
He says that the people that Trump is talking about pardoning are the same people that Ray says here that committed low-level crimes, trespassing on Capitol grounds where there wasn't even any signage or fencing telling them they weren't supposed to be there. Those people have been prosecuted and treated very unfairly. And these are the people that that President Trump is promising to pardon. Not group three, not the group that showed up there to commit violence and were planned and had plans and equipment for violence. No, group two is the group that President Trump has committed to pardoning. People that committed low-level crimes, trespassing on Capitol grounds when there was no signage or anything telling them that they couldn't be on Capitol grounds. This is what, and the media and everyone is lying to you about this. Listen to Ray again.
Then there's a second group, think of a reverse pyramid, a second group that is people who may have come intending to just be part of peaceful protests, but either swept up in the motive or emotion or whatever, engaged in kind of low-level criminal behavior, trespass, say, on the Capitol grounds, but not breaching the building.
So trespass on Capitol grounds. Didn't listen to what Ray says here.
Still criminal conduct.
Still criminal conduct.
Needs to be addressed.
Still needs to be addressed. So these people that trespass on the Capitol grounds when there's no signage, nothing telling them not to go, these people have been prosecuted. And these are the people that Trump says have been treated unfairly and that he plans, and he's been clear about this. Those are the people he plans on pardoning, and he should.
A lot of Capitol Police officers and other people as well.
Right. Well, no. Not violent, not people who would hurt police officers. Those who who got caught up in the riot, if you will.
He's called them political prisoners, sir.
I'm talking about the trespassers. There are some that have been.
You've heard Donald Trump differentiate between those folks?
You haven't?
Oh,
listen to what he says. You've heard Donald Trump differentiate between those people? Because I have not. This is what he says.
The riot, if you will.
He's called them political prisoners, sir.
I'm talking about the trespassers. There are some that have been.
You've heard Donald Trump differentiate between those folks? Because I have not.
Too strongly prosecuted. Okay, and we have weak prosecution on most violent crimes in my cities of Philadelphia.
You've heard Donald Trump differentiate between the folks that were there on January 6th on the Capitol, the ones that you're describing as just getting caught up in the riot and violent rioters?
I've had private conversations with him, so certainly I have, and of course they should. Okay, if somebody's beating a police officer,
look at this guy's face.
Okay, they're far cry different from those who basically wandered in to the Capitol, and they were wrong. But they should receive no more of a penalty than anybody else who would be.
I'm not sure there were a whole lot of folks just randomly wandering into the halls of Congress. It certainly didn't look like that from where I was standing.
You didn't see folks just randomly walking into the halls of Congress, he says. Interesting. Or maybe not into the halls of Congress, but into the Capitol. There are definitely people that just wandered in. All right, here you go, right here. I love it. So this is a door that you're going to see the Capitol Police here, just standing here at the door, letting these people in. They'll never show you this video. The media has never shown the public this video. This video was not shown at the January 6th committee. None of it. And these are Capitol Police just opening the door, letting people into the Capitol. You can see the doors open right here. And then you're going to see Capitol Police just flanked on each side as these people file in. Listen, you're going to hear one of these people saying that they're going to lock us in here, that he knows it's a trap, And he even says it. And it is a trap. It's 100% a trap.
They're going to lock us in.
They're going to lock us in. Look, Capitol Police, Capitol Police, Capitol Police, Capitol Police, Capitol Police, Capitol Police, Capitol Police. So why would they just open the doors and let these people in? And then the CNN guys says, I don't see anybody just wandering in. These people should not have the book thrown at them and not be in jail because Capitol Police opened the doors for them. Look at this. This is Capitol Police. These people should not be prosecuted. I could understand if Capitol Police told them to leave and they refused to leave, but they're just sitting here watching them as they go in, as they file in. Back to the CNN clown.
Is just getting caught up in the riot and violent rioters?
I've had private conversations with him, so certainly I have, and of course they should. Okay, if somebody's beating a police officer, and some did, okay, they're far cry different from those who basically wandered in to the Capitol, and they were wrong. But they should receive no more of a penalty.
They need to be pardoned, or at least have their sentences muted.
I'm not sure there were a whole lot of folks just randomly wandering into the halls of Congress. It certainly didn't look like that from where I was standing.
Boris,
2 blocks
I was
away.
there. I saw it.
Sir, respectfully, I have to disagree with your characterization, but I do appreciate your time,
I'm not minimizing anything because it was a bad day.
Well, you're saying that these folks deserve to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. The former president, is talking about pardoning the same people that attacked you and your colleagues.
Right. Like he didn't even. And you want to know what? Joe Biden dismissed. And
what does this have to do with Joe Biden? Let's talk about Donald Trump.
So this guy is saying that he's never heard Trump distinguishing between Group 2 and Group 3. That Director Ray says the Group 3. The smallest group, the group that was attacking the Capitol before Trump even finished speaking. And then Group 2, people that got caught up in the emotions and trespass or wandered through doors that the Capitol Police opened. He says that he's never heard Trump distinguish between those groups, which is weird because Trump did so on your network, CNN. You work for CNN, right, guy? You work here. You see CNN right here in the lower right corner. CNN is the same network, CNN. Trump did a town hall with your network, buddy, and he distinguished between the groups that he plans on pardoning and the groups that should not be pardoned. Take a listen.
My question to you is, will you pardon the January 6 rioters who were convicted of federal offenses?
I am inclined to pardon many of them. I can't say for every single one because a couple of them probably they got out of control. But
I don't even need to play anymore. I've already played it for you. Not every single one. The ones that got out of control and committed violence, those are not going to be pardoned. So what kind of game is CNN running here? And then the part about Biden that the representative was about to bring up, I want you to hear that part because he brings up the fact that none of these people said anything about Antifa burning our cities, looting stores. I can't wait to get into this stuff in the next podcast, in the video that I'm going to show you to remind you of what these people did in the summer of 2020. And none of them went to jail. None of them are serving the same penalties as the people that trespassed into the Capitol. These people set fires. They burnt down a bank here in San Diego, where I live. They looted all of these stores, set fires in all of these cities, attacked police. We're going to get into all of that. And none of these people said anything, but they want people that trespassed on Capitol grounds to have the books thrown at them. And quite frankly, it's a moot point for a lot of these guys at this point, because just today, the Supreme Court ruled on one of the charges that a lot of these low-level guys that have been charged for January 6th are being charged with. The Supreme Court has said that charge is not constitutional. So many of these people are going to get out anyway, and the others that are not going to have their sentences commuted because of this Supreme Court ruling, then yes, Trump should pardon.
More breaking news, this time about the January 6th rioters. The Supreme Court has just ruled. Let's get to Shannon Bream. What did they say?
So what they have said is that one of the statutes the Justice Department used to charge hundreds of different January 6 defendants is no good. And that includes President Donald Trump, because he has actually had two of these counts against him in the Jack Smith D.C. case against him, that federal criminal case that has been on hold here. So what essentially they say is this statute, which was passed in the wake of Enron, they say it doesn't fit here. He says, given that the subsection was enacted to address the Enron disaster, not some other far-flung set of dangers like what happened just right over here at the Capitol, it is unlikely that Congress responded with such an unfocused and grossly incommensurate patch in English that essentially means that all of these people who were charged under this particular obstruction statute for January 6th, that is no good.
So Sarbanes-Oxley is the law. When I heard this, I had no idea how they were using Sarbanes-Oxley to charge these people. But Sarbanes-Oxley was the financial law that was passed after Enron and WorldCom and all of that corporate fraud that took place in 2002. And the Biden administration was using this financial law to charge these January 6th, protesters, demonstrators, people who wandered on the Capitol lawn, and just to be very unfair. I mean, how could you even? You would have to be digging through laws to find something to use Sarbanes-Oxley. If you understand what that law is, to use that to prosecute these people, that's lawfare. You're looking for something to prosecute these people on. And just like Trump told Biden last night that his administration has been very unfair to the January 6th protesters, and he does intend on pardoning them. This is the way the conversation went in the debate last night. Let's take a listen.
Former President Trump, I want to ask you about January 6, 2021. After you rallied your supporters that day, some of them stormed the Capitol to stop the constitutionally mandated counting of electoral votes. As president, you swore an oath to, quote, preserve, protect, and defend, unquote, the Constitution. What do you say to voters who believe that you violated that oath through your actions and inaction on January 6th and worry that you'll do it again?
Well, I don't think too many believe that. And let me tell you about January 6th. On January 6th, we had a great border. Nobody coming through, very few. On January 6th, we were energy independent. On January 6th, we had the lowest taxes ever. We had the lowest regulations ever. On January 6th, we were respected all over the world. All over the world, we were respected. And then he comes in, and we're now laughed at.
Look at Biden's face.
A bunch of stupid people.
Oh, my God, people.
What happened to the United States?
Last night was a... I mean, it was absolutely unfair. This guy set up the entire debate with his rules, with everything that he wanted. It was on his terms. He got every single thing that he wanted. Mic cut, no audience. And Trump said, whenever, wherever, just call. And boy, I tell you, man, last night, guys, one for the books.
Under this man's leadership is horrible, including weaponization, which I'm sure at some point you'll be talking about, where he goes after his political opponent because he can't beat him fair and square.
You have 80 seconds left. My question was, what do you say to those voters who believe that you violated your constitutional oath through your actions and inaction on January 6, 2021, and worry that you'll do it again?
Well, I didn't say that to anybody. I said peacefully and patriotically. And Nancy Pelosi, if you just watched the news from 2 days ago, on tape to her daughter, who's a documentary filmmaker, they say, but she's saying, oh, no, it's my responsibility. I was responsible for this.
Absolutely.
Because I offered her 10,000 soldiers or National Guard, and she turned them down. And the mayor in writing, by the way, the mayor in writing turned it down, the mayor of D.C. They turned it down. I offered 10,000 because I could see, I had virtually nothing to do. They asked me to go make a speech. I could see what was happening. Everybody was saying they're going to be there on January 6th. They're going to be there. And I said, you know what? There's a lot of people coming. You could feel it. You could feel it too, and
everyone could feel it. Everyone could see. Everyone knew what was going on. So what is he talking about with Nancy Pelosi? He's talking about the tape I played for you guys last week of Nancy Pelosi in the car, and her filmmaker daughter is recording her say this. Take a listen.
We have responsibility, Terry. We did not have any accountability for what was going on there, and we should have. This is ridiculous. You're going to ask me in the middle of the thing when they've already breached the inaugural stuff
So she knows her daughter is recording. She knows she's being recorded. So this is all make believe.
The inaugural stuff should we call the Capitol Police? I mean, the National Guard? Why weren't the National Guard there to begin with?
Why weren't the National Guard there to begin with? Okay? So that's what Trump is talking about, what he was talking about in the debate last night. He was saying that Nancy Pelosi, she's on tape. It just came out a couple of days ago. She's on tape saying that, why weren't the National Guard there? That it was my responsibility. That's the other part here. Hold on. Anyway, she says that it's my responsibility. I think I just deleted that page, but she said it's my responsibility. So that's what he's talking about here. And that's what she says. And I explained to you why the National Guard wasn't there. But CNN, they did a fact check on Trump last night, and this was one of the fact checks pertaining to what you just heard. Take a listen.
He said Nancy Pelosi turned down his offer of 10,000 National Guard troops on January 6th. There's no evidence she even got such an offer. It was the president, not Pelosi, who had the power to deploy the D.C. Guard.
So it was the president, not Pelosi, that had the power to deploy the D.C. Guard. This is the fact check on CNN. Well, the president can't deploy. We have separation of powers, people. We have 3 different branches of government. The executive branch can't just send the military to the Capitol without a request. I mean, he cannot. So this is an absolute lie in this fact check to say that Trump had the power to deploy the military to the Capitol. Trump did not have the power to deploy the military to the Capitol and legally do it, because that's a separate branch of government. The legislative branch, which Nancy Pelosi, being the Speaker of the House, is one of the most important people in the legislative branch. She has the power to direct her sergeant at arms, who is a part of the Capitol board, to request the National Guard. And that's why she says that it was my responsibility. That's what she says. Here.
Harry, we didn't. Why weren't the National Guard there to begin with?
They thought that they had sufficient resources.
No, there's not a question of how they had. They don't know. They clearly didn't know, and I take responsibility.
I take responsibility. That's what she says, because it was your responsibility. And you had to request the National Guard, not you personally, but you direct your sergeant at arms, who is a member of the Capitol Police Board, and it has to be a formal request. I played this clip for you again last week. This is General Walker, who is the general of the D.C. National Guard. He says that he and Chief Son, who are the chief of Capitol Police, they talked on the Sunday before the Wednesday of January 6th, and Chief Son told him that he was not allowed to request the National Guard. It's an absolute lie, CNN, to say that the president can just send the military to the Capitol without a request. It's a lie. Listen.
I talked to Chief Son on Sunday. I talked to him Saturday and Sunday. We talk. We're friends. Mm-hmm. I've known him for a long time. So on Sunday, I asked him, are you going to request D.C. National Guard help? And if you do, I need it in writing. It has to be formal, because the Secretary of Defense has to approve it. He told me he was not allowed to request a support. And I asked him if he wanted me to share that, and he said, no, I can't even ask you for the support, is what he told me. Mm-hmm. But he did say... So I played all this for you last week, that General Walker testified that the chief of Capitol Police told him that he's not allowed to request the National Guard, and we talked about why he wasn't allowed to request the National Guard in the last podcast. And the reason why, let's review it here in this podcast. Let's see here. This is Chief Son here. Okay, here we go. Let's listen to this. This will tell you why the chief of Capitol Police was not allowed to request the National Guard, because he's a member of a board, of a 4-member board, who the board has to agree to request the National Guard. And so Chief Son's telling General Walker, I'm not allowed to request the National Guard because the board won't allow me to request the National Guard. And who else is on that 4-member board with the chief of Capitol Police? The Sergeant at Arms of the Senate and the Sergeant at Arms of the House of Representatives, who answers directly to the Speaker of the House, which is Nancy Pelosi.
Why was the request for National Guard assistance not approved at the same time you approved the expansion of the perimeter?
Senator, I did not take the call.
This guy right here was the House of Representatives Sergeant at Arms, This is the gentleman, Mr. Irving, who he answered directly to Nancy Pelosi. So when CNN says that Nancy Pelosi, here in his fact check, Nancy Pelosi didn't have the power to request the National Guard. No, Nancy Pelosi did not have the power to request the National Guard by herself, but the person who answers to her directly, the Sergeant at Arms, House Sergeant at Arms, who was on the Capitol Police Board, he did. So it's a head fake to say Nancy Pelosi didn't have this power. No, we're not talking about Nancy Pelosi directly. We're talking about this clown who answers to Nancy Pelosi.
You approved the expansion of the perimeter.
Senator, I did not take the call from Chief Sund on the 4th as a request. Chief Sund called me to tell me that he had received an offer from the National Guard to provide us 125 unarmed troops to work traffic control in the perimeter of the Capitol.
He's lying his teeth off.
Shortly after that discussion, I said, let's include Sergeant at Arms Stanger as chair of the board and another senior official with quite a bit of experience. The three of us talked it through. And during that call, the number one question on the table was, did the intelligence support it? Did the intelligence support that additional offer for those 125 troops?
Did you discuss this with anybody except Sergeant Armstanger and Chief Sund?
No, it was just this one phone call. And during that call, we all agreed that the intelligence did not support the troops and collectively decided to let it go.
So the intelligence, they did not have the intelligence that there was going to be violence. I played the clip of AOC basically, hold on one moment. Sorry about that. AOC basically refuting that because she had intelligence that there was going to be violence in her text messages, which is weird that she had the intelligence that there was going to be violence in her text messages, but the House Sergeant at Arms and the Capitol Police Board didn't have intelligence that there was going to be violence. And that's what Trump means, again, back here when he says everyone could feel it. That, yeah, I offered the National Guard because everyone could feel there was going to be a lot of people there, and there was a chance that there could be violence. There was a huge chance that there was going to be violence because, as you're going to see when we get into this in next week, January 6th was the third time in a matter of months that Trump supporters had come to Washington. And each other time that Trump supporters had come to Washington, his acceptance speech that he did at the White House to accept the nomination was one. You remember Rand Paul and his wife being harassed and attacked in the streets of D.C., because this is in the middle of Black Lives Matter protests as well. So his supporters were being attacked in the streets, and there was huge violence all over Washington the previous times that Trump supporters had come to Washington in those months before January 6th. So it was very likely there was going to be violence. I mean, the fact that they're saying that we didn't have any intelligence that there was going to be violence is ridiculous. Everyone knew there was going to be violence. That's what Trump's talking about here.
I was responsible for this because I offered her 10,000 soldiers or National Guard, and she turned them down. And the mayor in writing, by the way, the mayor in writing turned it down, the mayor of D.C., they turned it down. I offered 10,000 because I could see, I had virtually nothing to do. They asked me to go make a speech. I could see what was happening. Everybody was saying they're going to be there on January 6th. They're going to be there. And I said, you know what? There's a lot of people coming. You could feel it.
Everyone could feel it. Everyone could feel it. Everyone knew that there was going to be violence. And here's AOC again giving her story a week before that she's receiving text messages from other members of Congress saying there's going to be violence.
1 week before, the week prior to the insurrection, I started to get text messages that I needed to be careful. And that in particular, I needed to be careful about the 6th.
So she's got intelligence that there's going to be violence. And just like Trump says, everyone could feel it. Everyone knew there was tons of violence in the previous times before that Trump supporters had come to Washington in the weeks before. You had all this violence all over the country in the months before with Black Lives Matter. What would make you think that there's not going to be violence? But this guy says that the guy who answers directly to Nancy Pelosi says that they didn't know that there was going to be violence, and that's why the chief of Capitol Police tells the general of the D.C. National Guard, I'm not allowed to request the National Guard because Nancy Pelosi's stoogie will not let me request the National Guard.
I talked to Chief Son on Sunday. I talked to him Saturday and Sunday. We talk. We're friends. I've known him for a long time. So on Sunday, I asked him, are you going to request D.C. National Guard help? And if you do, I need it in writing. It has to be formal because the Secretary of Defense has to approve it. He told me he was not allowed to request the support. And I asked him if he wanted me to share that, and he said, no, I can't even ask you for the support, is what he
So I'm not allowed to ask you for the support because Nancy Pelosi's henchmen will not allow me to ask for the support. I was overruled on the Capitol Police Board, is what the chief of Capitol Police says. And the reason that the House Sergeant at Arms gives that he overruled the chief of Capitol Police, he says that we all agreed that the intelligence didn't support the need for Capitol Police, which is ridiculous. Everyone knew that there was going to be violence. AOC had the text messages, like Trump said, everyone could feel it, everyone knew, but they say they didn't have the intelligence. I want to show you how these guys are lying and they can't even get their story straight. Take a listen to this part of the testimony.
Mr. Irving, you said in your testimony that when asked for National Guard assistance, you approved it.
So this, as you can see, it says the day. So there's two different requests for the National Guard. There's the National Guard prior to January 6th that are there, that are stationed, that are prepared. And then that didn't happen. So after the riot had already started the day of, requesting the National Guard on the fly, which is something totally different. So that's what this conversation is about. It's about that second incident of after the riot had already happened. The National Guard wasn't called before, but after the riot is taking place, in that frantic fury, they are attempting to request the National Guard on the fly. That's what this conversation is about.
Son stated that he asked for the National Guard assistance at 1:09, and you approved. It was approved at 2:10. Why would it take an hour to approve National Guard assistance on your part in that moment of crisis, Mr. Irving?
Senator, from my recollection, I did not receive a request for approval for National Guard until shortly after 2 p.m. when I was in Michael Stanger's office.
Let me get that straightened out. Mr. Son, do you know when you asked for National Guard assistance? Was it 1:09 or was it 2 p.m.?
It was 1:09, sir.
1:09. These are both members of the Capitol Police Board. There's only 4 members on the board. Stanger here, not Stanger, Irving here is the House Sergeant at Arms. And he says that he received, this is day of, that he received a call for a request of National Guard at 2 o'clock. And then the chief of Capitol Police says, no, it was at 1 o'clock. So they can't even get their story straight. So somebody's lying here. Somebody is lying. Who's lying? Is it the person who answers directly to Nancy Pelosi? Or is it the chief of Capitol Police? Who's lying here? Take a listen.
Crisis. Mr. Irving.
Senator, from my recollection, I did not receive a request for approval for National Guard until shortly after 2 p.m. when I was in Michael Stanger's office.
Let me get that straightened out. Mr. Son, do you know when you asked for National Guard assistance? Was it 1:09 or was it 2 p.m.?
It was 1:09, sir.
1:09. And who did you ask for assistance at 1:09?
It was from Mr. Irving. I believe he was in the company of Mr. Stinger at the time as well.
So he says at 1:09, I talked to Nancy Pelosi's guy. I talked to him at one. Now that's an hour difference. We're talking about day of. I mean, when the riot's going on, an hour is a lot of time. That's a lot of time. This guy says, no, I talked to the chief of Capitol Police who requested the National Guard at 2 p.m. Chief of Capitol Police says, no, it was an hour earlier. Who's telling the truth here?
When I was in Michael Stanger's office.
And not only is Chief of Capitol Police...
Senator, I have no recollection.
Not only is...
109, sir.
Not only
did not receive a request...
Not only is the Chief of Capitol Police saying that I requested the National Guard at 1:09, I talked to this guy. This is the guy I talked to. And the guy that he talked to, that he says he talked to, says, no, I didn't get a call at 1:09. It was at 2, it was an hour later.
All right, let me get that straightened out. Mr. Sun, do you know when you asked for National Guard assistance? Was it 1:09 or was it 2 p.m.?
It was 1:09, sir.
1:09. And who did you ask for assistance at 1:09?
It was from Mr. Irving. I believe he was in the company of Mr. Stinger at the time as well.
And Mr. Irving, why would you not remember that?
Senator, I have no recollection of a conversation with Chief Sund. At that time, I was on the floor during the Electoral College session, and my conversation with Chief Sund in that time frame was shortly before 1:30, when I recall he was describing conditions outside as deteriorating. He may, in fact, be submitting a request, and I carried that forward. And
there should be records.
As much as I can tell you,
there should be phone records. There should, and this is the kind of stuff that if the January 6th, the Congressional Committee, if it was really interested in getting to the bottom of this stuff and finding out what had really happened, they would have gotten these phone records. They would have found out if the Chief of Capitol Police actually called the House Sergeant at Arms and requested the National Guard at 1:09 or at 2:09, or he says a little bit after 2. Who knows when that is? But I'm telling you that somebody's lying here, and this was all a setup. It was all a setup because they did have the intelligence. They did have the intelligence, and we know for a fact that they had an intelligence because there was an internal report that they had that we know for a fact that told them that Congress was going to be a target. This was the New York Times article that I mentioned last week. Headline here: Capitol Police told to hold back on riot response on January 6th. Report finds. Despite being tipped that Congress itself was the target. Now, why does Congress itself was the target, which is in quotes, is the report that they got. Congress itself is the target. Why is that significant? Because like I told you, Trump supporters had been to Washington, D.C. 3 times before January 6th in the months leading up to January 6th. They had come for, again, Donald Trump's acceptance speech. They had come for 2 other demonstrations, and each time the Antifa, Black Lives Matter mobs attacked Trump supporters. But this report that Capitol Police was getting right before January 6th was telling them, no, the Trump supporters are not the target this time. Congress itself is the target, not the Trump supporters. So that's why this is in quotes, and that's the significant part of this report. So not only, like Trump says, that everyone could feel that there were going to be violence, or AOC is getting warnings in her text messages that there's going to be violence. We know for a fact that Capitol Police got a report telling them that there was going to be violence and that Congress itself was the target on January 6th. Capitol Police, here it says, despite being tipped that Congress itself was the target on January 6th, Capitol Police were ordered not to use their most significant crowd control weapons, according to a scathing new watchdog report. And it is my belief that Yogananda Pittman, who she is now the head of security at Berkeley University, right outside of Nancy Pelosi's district, She got this job after January 6th, well-paying job, head of security at Berkeley University. Yogananda Pittman is who I believe was working with them, and she's the one who gave this order. I don't have time to flush that out for you today, but I want you to listen to more of this Senate hearing where the chief of Capitol Police and the sergeant at arms for both the Senate and the House, they all testified. I want you to listen to this testimony specifically about this report that they got telling them that Congress itself was the target.
The Intelligence Division of the Capitol Police issued a internal report which reportedly stated, and this is some of this has been out in the public domain, that instead of targeting protesters, as you've seen in the prior events that occurred that you've referenced earlier, that, quote, this is quote that has been out in the public domain, that Congress itself is the target on the 6th by Trump supporters. Congress was the target. The report also mentioned that members of the Proud Boys, white supremacist groups, other extremist groups would be in attendance and, quote, again out in public sources, may be inclined to become violent. So you have your own report. Did you see that report that was put out on the 3rd?
Yes, I did.
So how is not that a warning of some extraordinary measures? Now, I understand you increased...
How's that not a warning?
Folks there and you increased your presence. But how is that not a real big warning flag? And if it was, what exactly did you do when you read that report?
So that was one of the reports that contributed to the fact that we expanded our perimeter. I reached out, looking at it, I'd reach out to the Metropolitan Police Department, just knowing, even before that report, knowing, what that extremists were likely to be there. In the previous reports for it, that has been called for on social media for people to be armed. In talking with our partners over at the Metropolitan Police Department, I reached out to say, hey, you're going to be able to provide us some support. And
so listen to me, people. You got to understand this, because this is the guy, Steve Son, this guy, chief of Capitol Police. This is the guy that General Walker is talking about here when he says, I talked to Chief Son on Sunday. And I asked Chief Son, are you going to request the National Guard? He says, I'm not allowed to request the National Guard. And as we just showed, the reason he wasn't allowed to request the National Guard is because Stenger here, what's his name? I can't believe I'm drawing blank on his name again. Stenger is the House or the Senate Sergeant at Arms who's passed away. And this is Irving. Sergeant at Arms Irving testified that we didn't have the intelligence. We didn't have the intelligence to request the National Guard. So that's why Chief Son wasn't allowed to request the National Guard. But then when Chief Son is questioned about this report saying that Congress itself was the target, he says that, yeah, I reached out to Metro DC Police to see if you're going to be able to offer us some assistance. So you were allowed to reach out to Metro DC Police after getting this report saying that Congress was the target. You were allowed to reach out to them saying, are you going to be able to offer us some support? But you were not allowed to request the National Guard? Is that what you're telling me? This is ridiculous, people.
There and you increased your presence. But how is that not a real big warning flag? And if it was, what exactly did you do when you read that report?
So that was one of the reports that contributed to the fact that we expanded our perimeter.
And then this idea about expanding the perimeter, it is a ridiculous idea. They put, like I told you people last week, they put up the fence after the riot. They kept this fence up for 6 months after the riot. Look at this fence. They have, razor wire on top. They've kept this fence up for 6 months after. This is a perimeter. This is what a perimeter looks like. With the steel fence, with razor wire, this is a perimeter. So they didn't put this perimeter up until after the riot. So what is he talking about when he says that we expanded the perimeter? It's ridiculous. This is the perimeter that you had on the day of the riot.
So I'm listening to the speech in my ear, thanks to...
You had these little bicycle racks. These little bicycle racks that were easily knocked over, easily removed. What kind of perimeter is this? You don't have... that's not a perimeter. So it's ridiculous. He's not requesting the National Guard. He's not expanding the perimeter. We know for a fact that he's getting a report telling him that Congress itself is the target. This is a hoax, people. It's a hoax.
Of some extraordinary measures. Now, I understand you increased and you had folks there and you increased your presence. But how is that not a real big warning flag? And if it was, what exactly did you do when you read that report?
So that was one of the reports that contributed to the fact that we expanded our perimeter. I reached out, looking at it. I'd reach out to the Metropolitan Police Department, just knowing, even before that report, knowing, what that extremists were likely to be there. In the previous reports for it that has been called for on social media for people to be armed. In talking with our partners over at the Metropolitan Police Department, I reached out to say, hey, you're going to be able to provide us some support.
So he reached out to the Metro Police Department, but he wasn't allowed to reach out to the National Guard and request the National Guard. That's interesting. So Joe Biden, get this one back up. Today was in North Carolina, and this was his get right speech. After his bomb last night in the debate, I guess they pumped him up with some of his cocktails, and he did this speech in North Carolina today. It sounded like a totally different Joe Biden, energized. But I want you to listen to this part when he.
And then his biggest lie, he lied about how he had nothing to do with the insurrection of January 6th. We all saw with our own eyes.
We all saw with our own eyes.
We saw thousands in his direction attack the Capitol. We saw police being attacked, the Capitol being ransacked, the mob hunting for Speaker Pelosi, gallows literally set up for Mike Pence.
Gallows set up for Mike Pence.
He told him as he sat in the dining room, the private dining room, one door off my Oval Office. He sat there for 3 hours watching the TV. He did not a single thing to stop it. Nothing.
Yeah, that's because he tried to send the National Guard before, and they said they didn't want the National Guard. They weren't allowed to have the National Guard. There wasn't enough intelligence for the National Guard. Where's the gallows? This is the gallows that he's talking about. You see this? The gallows for Mike Pence. This is the real image of the gallows. It says right here on the side, this is art. But it's a hoax. It's a hoax, people. This is what they show you on TV, the gallows for Mike Pence. It's art. You're not going to hang anybody on this. You couldn't. Jeez, people. So it's absolutely ridiculous. This is a hoax that they're perpetrating on us. And a lot of people are falling for it. Here's video of Capitol Police removing those little bicycle racks. This is the perimeter. That we got a report that Congress itself was the target. And so we set a perimeter. Look at this perimeter. Look at this. And just move them out of the way. Just move those little bicycle racks out of the way. Come on in. Come on in. What kind of perimeter is this? Now, again, you're setting a perimeter. Why not this perimeter? Where the Capitol Police just, can't just move them out of the way. Why not this perimeter? Because they wanted the riot, people. I'm not going to be able to get into showing you why they wanted the riot in this podcast. I really wanted to, but it doesn't look like I'm going to be able to because we're almost done. I'm going to show you this guy, Capitol Police guy, waving him in. I mean, you're going to wave them in and then charge them with trespassing? I mean, come on. Look at this guy. Come on in, waving them. Come on. Waving them in. Look at this guy. Come on, waving them in. It was a trap. They set it up. Give you some more of these videos. I'm almost done. This is the one, again, of them walking by the Capitol Police. Walking through the doors. The Capitol Police open. They won't show you any of this. The guy saying that they're going to lock us in here because he can sense that it's a trap. It obviously was a trap. They weren't going to lock you in, though. They were just going to prosecute you using Sarbanes-Oxley later. So cops let these people in. They come in. Here's another video. Once they're in, cops just letting them loiter around in the rotunda, in the Capitol. Like all these police officers here, Capitol Police, not asking them to leave. Why don't you ask them to leave? Why don't you ask them to get out of there if they're not supposed to be there? Look at this Capitol Police, just letting them loiter around. Doesn't seem concerned at all. Here's video of, I don't know who these guys are, but they're wearing all black. All black. Who wears all black, people? Let me show you who wears all black. This is from last podcast. It says Antifa, and they operate in a black bloc. We're talking about black bloc a little bit last week, but this is all black. This is what you saw, Antifa. So you see these guys wearing all black, black shoes, black pants, and black everything, and they're changing their clothes into Trump gear. Look at this. Put on some red, white, and blue with my Trump hat. Who are these guys? So it's a hoax. It's rigged, and we'll get back into this in the next podcast. I have a lot more that I want to share with you guys, and we're going to talk about the violence in 2020, beginning with Black Lives Matter in late May. Hope you guys have a great weekend. Next week's a holiday week, but I will be here on Monday and Friday of next week with podcasts, and hope you'll be here with me. Again, you guys have a great weekend, and I will see you on Monday.